Sounds good in this little session now, so I'm going to hand over immediately to Martin from JISC to tell us all about the rise of the robots.
Okay, hello everybody. Before I start, I'm going to take a little picture. When I do these talks, I've been taking 360-degree selfies, which I'll share with you guys afterwards. It's quite a nice thing. You've got a whole bunch of people gathered together like this. So let's do that. I'll let him sit down. No pressure. So if you want to, I don't know, just sort of wave your hands in the air and go, woo! So that's just a bit of fun. That's not what I'm actually here for. What I wanted to do was to talk about three things. So three things. The first one is hardware. And you might say, well, what's that got to do with us robots, hardware? Maybe you'll see when I do this bit, actually, perhaps it is more relevant than you might think. The second one is software, and you can see particularly I've put up what we've started to call AI and machine learning, computers that you can talk to, have a conversation with. And if you were at the Lightning talk, we did a little thing with Amazon Alexa to maybe give you an idea about the kind of way that people could interact with your services in the future, which really leads me on to part three, which is what happens next. So I'm going to do that, but first I wanted to pose you a conundrum. So this is a letter written in 1953, and it's written by someone called Ray, and he's basically saying, you know, this stuff they call science fiction? Load of rubbish. It's a scream. Look, I can write some science fiction, and he's written a little bit of science fiction. Right down at the end, might be able to see this. That's the first time the word Google appeared in print. So I asked Google, and he told me it wasn't enough. Here's a question: who do you think Ray is? The person who wrote this letter? No. One person in this room knows already. So the answer is it's actually Raymond Chandler. So Raymond Chandler was there going, science fiction, anybody can do this. But he just inadvertently coined Google as a noun, Google with a capital G, back in 1953. Who knew? So just found that in passing. Okay, but before I do my main bit, I did just want to say a couple of words about where I'm coming from. And I don't know, probably quite a few of you here have some awareness of JISC. If you don't, we're the people that run Janet, we're the people that run EduRoam. We do quite a lot of other services on top of that. So for example, the Office 365 that we were talking about earlier on, we've done the national deal that most of the universities and colleges have picked up to use Office 365. So we do a fair bit of that sort of thing. My role at JISC, as well as coming to places like this to talk about robots, is to look out for the things that we could be doing next. So who could we partner with? What new ideas, what new technologies might be useful for folk like you? So it's really interesting to come along to an event like this and talk to you about what you're doing and what you see the future holds. So that's enough about us. What about robots? Well, has anybody seen this little character? This is Pepper. You seen Pepper? So Pepper here, Pepper's an anthropomorphic robot. Pepper actually looks like a human. And there's a time when if you'd said, oh, well, there'll be robots that'll look like humans, they'll walk about and you'll talk to them, you'd have said that's just science fiction. But actually, you can do that with Pepper. So here's Pepper trying to sell you fancy coffee. And you might say, oh yeah, okay, this is a little bit staged. So in 140 mobile phone stores, SoftBank, who own Pepper, are kind of the biggest mobile phone company in Japan. 140 plus SoftBank stores, you come in, Pepper is what you see when you come in. You don't get greeted by a human saying, hello, have you thought about renewing your contract? Instead, you get this cute robot, and the robot wants to talk to you and interact with you. And Nestle are planning to introduce it in over 1,000 of their espresso outlets, places where you buy the fancy coffee capsules. So maybe the robots are a little bit closer than we think, and maybe the robots are doing some of the things that perhaps you might have thought back in the 1950s were the stuff of, science fiction novels. Perhaps they're actually starting to do all of that. And I'm going to play you, I've got a few video clips in here, but we don't have much time, so I'll just play you a little bit of each one. So this is what happened when Pepper came to visit the Financial Times.
No rush, take your time to close the curtains and remove any obstacles around me. Say, okay, when you think it's good.
Okay.
So, I am the robot. You are the human.
Thank you.
And this is the beginning of a beautiful story. I like humans. Humans are so cute.
What once existed only in the mind of Isaac Asimov is now...
So, we might have particular ideas about robots that are, grounded in what we personally experience. An industrial robot arm that picks things up and moves them around. You can't talk to it. It's not going to crack jokes with you and all that sort of thing. These robots, a little bit different. One of the things I'm most interested in is what Amazon are doing with robots. So you talk about Amazon and robots. There's this lovely Japanese thing here. I can't remember the name of it. Does anybody remember the name of this? I was going to look it up before I started my talk, but I forgot. It's a little Japanese character that they make out of Amazon boxes, a little character robot. But Amazon have real robots. So Amazon's real robot started out life as a product from something called Kiva Systems. And they actually bought the company in the end because they liked what Kiva were doing so much. So let's just have a little sneaky peek at what Amazon do with robots. That might be enough of a peek, actually. Gives you a little bit of an idea
and your
of where your stuff
online purchase is
is coming
complete.
from.
But Betty Bot's work is just beginning. She's a Kiva robot at Quiet Logistics Fulfillment Center.
Called Betty. Some little gender dysphoria going on.
Behind every online store is a warehouse full of merchandise. One is Quiet Logistics, where there are 1.5 is operating at peak productivity and responds to changing consumer demand throughout the day. It even eliminates bottlenecks in the shipping area for human workers ready to purchase for shipment to your door.
Of humans who do the picking, put it in a box and send it to you. So that's enough of that. But actually, that's not just an experiment. They already have 30,000 robots working in their warehouses worldwide. So this is actually a thing. It's a bit like Pepper being a greeter in those stores. There's actually a real thing. This is actually happening right now. The Amazon example, for me, is particularly interesting because they're now looking at the next level, which is those awkward things that you really need a human to pick up. So if you thought, well, it's okay because when the robots come and take my job, there'll always be a job, working in the Amazon distribution center or something like that. Well, the thing they're working on now is how do we make a robot that can pick up an awkwardly shaped object, that can pick up something that's very delicate, won't drop it, something that's very heavy as well is another example. So they have this thing called the Amazon Picking Challenge, and if you Google it, you'll see that the brightest computer science research teams around the world are competing in the Amazon Picking Challenge to see who can come up with the robot design and the code that will pick just about any object and put it in the box to send to you. So the robot brings the shelf with the stuff to the other robot that puts it in the box. Once it's passed from there, it goes to a robot that wraps it up and sends it off. So it's very interesting to see how Amazon, perhaps more than any other company, are looking to say, right, how can we really exploit this technology? And this could be a dystopian view. You could look at this and you could say, where is the world going to? But it's also intensely interesting. And if you work in technology, all of these things are very nuanced. There are two sides to every story, which I'll try and talk about as we go on. veering slightly from robots with arms, robots with wheels, we're also seeing an awful lot of devices getting a chip put into them. And I think it speaks nicely to the cybersecurity conversation that we had during the Lightning talks. Right now, venture capitalists are putting a chip into just about anything. So here's a toothbrush. Here's a fork, the happy fork. And a happy fork is keeping an eye on what you're eating. So if I've been using the happy fork back at lunchtime, I would probably have said, I think you've had enough now. Those chips, of course, are running code, and the code is by and large not particularly well sanity checked. It's there about getting product to market. It's not about getting the most robust, most secure, most reliable product. And what that means is that some of those things will subsequently end up on Showdown. Does anybody know Showdown? Yeah, I thought there'd be at least one. Keep an eye on you. So Showdown is the map of things that people should never have connected to the internet. And that includes power stations, it includes public transit, there's railway networks that are connected to the internet, which shouldn't really be there. So, you know, you might see your fork or your toothbrush on there one day. And people might be there going, as we've seen recently with CCTV cameras, they might be saying, do you know what? I'll have a go at that. If I can break into that toothbrush, and this might sound facetious, but this is what's actually happening with CCTV cameras right now. If I could break into that toothbrush, I'd have a botnet of toothbrushes. And right now, Mirai, one of the most virulent botnets, is actually driven by CCTV cameras because they ship with very poor quality control, software is readily exploited, and it's sat there permanently connected to the internet. Yep, okay, I'm going to attack that, I'm going to see what I can run on it. So very interesting. If you get it wrong, the consequences are quite fascinating to think about. I mean, remember the robots in the White House? Remember the greeter in the store? Actually, that all went horribly wrong. But luckily we have software, so software will save us. I don't know who's seen, you must probably all have seen photos of Google's self-driving car. Who wants one of these? Say, I knew there'd be at least one. And of course Tesla also have one. Who wants a Tesla? Tough luck, you're in the wrong job. have to go and find a new job in the city or something. But actually, my slide's a bit wrong there. There are over 90,000 Teslas on the market already that people have been using autopilot on, which is Tesla's self-driving technology. And they've driven, I haven't got the number because it's covered up by that image, but they've driven, I think it was over 1 million miles on autopilot. So all the while, people have bought a Tesla. You can't buy the Google car. The Google car might never come to market. But you can buy the Tesla, and everybody who's bought one is training it to be a better driver. So there you are. You know, if you buy a Tesla, you're helping all the other Tesla owners when you use autopilot to make autopilot better. That's really fascinating. What happened recently was Uber decided that they wanted to get in on the action too. So Uber hired an entire university self-driving car and robotics team to come and work for them, which is how they were able to announce self-driving Ubers all of a sudden in a blaze of publicity. So there's a lot that's going on here. I picked on cars because it's something everyone can relate to. But deep down inside, it's about this machine learning technology, which is fundamentally is about teaching computer algorithms to recognize things and do the appropriate thing when you see them. So here's an example. And this is, anyone seen this before? Google DeepMind. They have quite a few videos of what they've trained their AI to do. This one is the AI learning to play Breakout. And if you're old like me, you probably remember playing Breakout on an Atari console that was in front of your TV in the early 80s. What they told the AI was basically you want to maximize your score, you want to make the game last as long as possible. And it just keeps playing keeps playing, and it says, oh, that didn't work, won't do that again. Oh, that worked. So after it's been doing this for a few hundred games, it hits on a strategy that was really very effective. And the strategy, as you can probably see, is to just break through on one side, and we're done. The game practically plays itself at that point. And that's something that you, me, somebody in this room would probably have figured out eventually. But that AI is now the world champion breakout player, if there was such a thing. There is a world championship for Go, which Google famously won. How do they use that technology? Well, again, I'll only play a snippet of this.
We spend so much of our lives driving from place to place.
Here's a blind man going for a ride in a car.
I'm just going to stop.
It drives itself.
Save us a seat.
Shouldn't it be easier and safer to get where we want to go?
So let me see if I can just...
Since 2009, real city streets have every
So
single
those are the boxes.
until
Those
after more
graphics.
than
This is what
miles,
the
we're
car
ready to take a big step.
Car sees, pedestrians, car sees,
In
cyclists.
2015, we completed the world's first truly driverless ride on public roads. Just a person in a car, no steering wheel, no pedals, navigating everyday traffic.
Well, I've never been in Austin, Texas. Now I'm driving in Austin, Texas.
So that's, again, enough of that, but we will share the slides with you if you want to take a look at any of these some more. So the technology, I would say, has lots of interesting potential. And really, that's where we've got to say, actually, what will happen next? And there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. I'm really pleased that so many of you are here at 4 o'clock on the 20th of January, because there's another event happening a little further afield, which I thought one or two people might have snuck off to. The truth is, there are pros and cons. So on this slide, I've put some of the cons, and I'll cover some pros on the next slide. That simple thing about work that you thought would probably always be done by humans. I hope what you've seen in some of those examples is that there are lots of things that we probably assumed would always be done by humans, or would not be done by robots or by machine learning for decades, perhaps, 100 years maybe. And many of those things, because of this exponential growth in these technologies that we've seen in the last few years, it's not like they're creeping up on us really, they're motoring along, and we can take advantage of them. That's really where I'm coming from. But equally, we could be caught out by them, and we could be caught out in a big way. So anything that you do which is essentially repetitive, if what you do has no imagination to it, there's no innovation to it, if you follow a set, prescribed, routine, procedure, process, then your job actually is perhaps more at risk than you might realise. I'd like to think that that doesn't apply to people who work at universities, because the environment is so diverse, it's so stimulating. We've got to watch out for it. And if you live in San Francisco, well, yes, there really are people throwing stones at the Google bus because they're like this guy. They don't see those opportunities trickling down to them. And I look at my own kids who love the internet, they love their iPads, and they learn an awful lot through those things, but at the same time, there's such a thing as too much screen time. You can overdo these things. And in China, we've got this rather alarming statistic of 86% of kids who need to wear glasses. So you can overdo all sorts of things. However, these same technologies are the things that give SpaceX the ability to land a 40-meter high rocket on a drone ship, which is barely bigger than the rocket itself. When you look at the video of SpaceX landing their rocket, if they miss, if they're even just a few meters out, there's an enormous explosion. These technologies are hugely powerful, they have huge potential. And that really, I think, is going to be the question for all of us over the next few years, is how do we exploit that potential, and how do we avoid, if you like, the nightmare scenario, those things that we talked about before We just really don't know what to see. And I think that if we look at the positive, if we look at the potential, then it is about space travel, it's about whole new careers, it's about, in fact, it is about things like a new approach to what the nation state means. We think about the way that Brexit has influenced thinking so far, it's not even happened yet. Actually, all of these digital things don't really care what country you're in. They don't care what your flag is or what language you speak, to a huge extent. So they will just carry on going, and our concepts of nation states might turn out to be a little bit irrelevant. But where we come, and this is where I drag it in my closing minutes, drag it as hard as I can back into education and research. I think what this particularly means for us is people's lives are going to be very different in terms of careers, in terms of learning. So you used to have this concept that, well, I go to college, I learn a trade, I go to university, I learn to be a professional in a particular profession, I get all that knowledge that I need. I might need to top it up a little bit from time to time, but fundamentally I'm set at that point. And I think what we'll see more and more is we need to refresh that knowledge. A whole bunch of stuff changed. It didn't change over a period of half of one's career. It changed over the period of half a year, or 5 years. So many things are changing so quickly. And that is actually an opportunity. It's a real opportunity if you're in education. So, if you thought, right, this is all a bit doom-laden, I don't like the sound of this, it's not going to end well. Well, think about this. Udacity, who are one of the big MOOC providers, just launched a nano degree. This is their accredited mini courses in self-driving cars. And they didn't just do that off their own bat, they did it with Mercedes and NVIDIA, who make the chips that are used for a lot of the machine learning. 20,000 students have already said, yeah, I'm up for a bit of that. So I think for folk such as yourselves, and for us and in supporting you, these kind of developments are very interesting. What happens when your institution comes back to you and says, do you know what, actually, we've realised we've got a real strength in this area. Maybe it's self-driving cars, maybe it's robotics, maybe it's haptics. There's a really happening thing. We've got a real strength in this. How can you help us to do something like that? And my final slide, I think that there's a tendency when you do a job every day to really focus on the things that you do every day, but that might not be using your skills and expertise to their best effect, and you might not be using them to their utmost. And in IT, I think there's a particular transition that's been happening for quite a few years now, but we saw it demonstrated very well earlier on today with people using Office 365 tools. In the past, you would have run a collaboration suite, you would have run a cluster of servers to host the collaboration suite on. It would certainly have been one person's job. You might have needed 2 or 3 people to back them up because it's quite a big deal. It needs a storage area network to run it all off. There's huge dependencies that need to be in place for what we used to call group work to work. Now, you press a button and go over in Office 365 land or Google Apps land, all of these services spring into action. And that actually, we shouldn't view that as a threat, because what that means is that we have the opportunity to use our knowledge, to use our skills, to do new stuff. And I would suggest there are 3 particular things. So one of those is supporting researchers, and there's this phrase, research software engineering, which has come into vogue. Researchers can't avoid digital technology, they can't avoid code, it's everywhere. Machine learning can be a hugely powerful tool for them. Giving them a way to get to those technologies and exploit them, absolutely huge. Technology-enhanced learning, we saw some great examples today of technology being used to help in facilitating workshops, but also, of course, those same technologies could be used very effectively in education. There's always going to be a lot more that we can do with that. To reach out to